The announcement came like thunder rolling across a quiet valley, sudden, jarring, and impossible to ignore. People all over Britain woke to the words splashed across television screens and phone alerts. Prince William, heir to the throne, had spoken publicly and decisively about his brother, Prince Harry, and Meghan Markle. But it wasn't just another family dispute made visible to the world. This time, the words carried the weight of centuries. The message was clear and unrelenting. Harry, Meghan, and their children were no longer part of the monarchy's line of succession, nor would they enjoy the privileges once associated with their royal titles. It was the kind of pronouncement that forced both supporters and critics of the royal family to sit up straighter, lean closer, and ask themselves if they were really witnessing history repeat itself in some cruel, modern version of exile and banishment. Imagine for a moment the setting in which such words might have been spoken. William, not just as a brother but as the future King of England, standing before the cameras with the kind of calm, measured tone that leaves no space for misunderstanding. His face steady, his voice deliberate, his message final. No frills, no metaphors, just the plain announcement that a permanent line had been drawn. That image alone evokes shivers because it is not simply about titles and privileges. It is about family, duty, betrayal, and the heavy burden of the crown. And it forces the audience to ask, when the institution and your own brother stand on opposite ends, which side do you choose? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The beginning of this story is rooted not in the announcement itself, but in the years of turbulence that preceded it. To understand why William's words struck like lightning, one must return to the fractures that grew steadily between the two brothers after Meghan entered the royal stage. Once celebrated as the royal Fab Four, William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan represented a modernized monarchy, young faces for a new generation. For a brief moment, they were a symbol of hope. But cracks quickly emerged, magnified by the intense glare of media scrutiny and differences in how each couple saw their duty to the crown. Harry and Meghan's decision to leave the royal family in 2020, known as Megxit, was a shockwave that reverberated around the world. But as divisive as that decision was, it still carried the underlying sense of possibility. Perhaps, people thought, the rift could be mended in time. The brothers could reconcile, Meghan could find peace outside palace walls, and the monarchy could adapt. The door was still open, even if only slightly. That door, however, is what William slammed shut with his announcement. By declaring Harry and Meghan officially banished, the heir to the throne didn't just remove them from an institution. He declared the break permanent. And permanence is what makes this story so gripping. As the middle of this narrative unfolds, one can't help but focus on the symbolism. This was not just a family matter aired in public. This was about survival. The monarchy has existed for over 1,000 years by adapting, evolving, and cutting away pieces of itself that threaten the stability of the whole. Throughout history, kings and queens have had to make brutal decisions, exiling even their own kin when the institution wavered. The echoes of history are deafening here. From Edward VIII, who abdicated for love and was cast into a life of exile, to Princess Diana, whose story of heartbreak exposed the monarchy's flaws, the royal family has always had to wrestle with individuals versus the institution. William's announcement falls squarely into that tradition. The middle of this introduction also forces us to confront the human side of this drama. It is easy to view Harry and Meghan as mere figures on a chessboard, but they are people with children, with feelings, with a story that is both glamorous and tragic. Imagine Meghan reading the headlines that morning, her face caught somewhere between defiance and disbelief. Imagine Harry, who once shared every private moment of grief with his brother, now realizing that the man who once stood beside him at their mother's funeral has now effectively cast him out of the family's future. The personal anguish is layered beneath the public spectacle, and it's here that viewers begin to understand this isn't just politics or ceremony. It's about the destruction of a bond once thought unbreakable. The ending of this introduction must leave viewers not with closure, but with a gnawing curiosity. What did William's words mean for the monarchy going forward? What happens when a royal family already fractured by scandal and media storms decides to make its fracture official? How do Meghan and Harry, two figures who have built their brand on defying royal expectations, respond when the final door is shut in their faces. And perhaps most importantly, what does this say about the institution itself? Has William acted out of strength, preserving a legacy for his children and future generations, or has he risked being remembered as the brother who chose the crown over blood? The silence after the announcement was deafening, both inside the palace and outside in the world beyond. Reporters scrambled for statements, commentators dissected every word, and ordinary citizens debated whether this was justice or cruelty. But the story you are about to hear isn't only about the announcement. It's about the path that led to it, the reactions it provoked, and the lasting consequences it will leave behind. To understand this moment, we must dive deep into the conflicts, the betrayals, the power struggles, and the heartbreak that brought us here. By the end of this journey, you will not only understand why William made this decision, but also what it reveals about the future of the monarchy itself. You will see how history has a way of repeating itself, how personal choices can alter centuries-old traditions, and how the tension between family and duty can push even brothers to the breaking point. So stay with me, because this is not just a story about royals. It is a story about loyalty, about sacrifice, about power, and about what happens when the bonds of family are tested by the weight of a crown. This is the beginning. It did not happen overnight. The fracture between Prince William and Prince Harry, between the crown and the couple who once symbolized modern hope for the monarchy, was not the product of a single quarrel or headline. It was the slow tightening of a rope, frayed by time, pulled by duty, and eventually snapped by choices that could no longer be reconciled. To understand how William's announcement came to carry such weight, one has to step back into the years that preceded it, when tensions were still whispers, not yet proclamations, and when cracks in the family's unity were still being patched over with smiles for the cameras. The storm began quietly, almost invisibly, behind palace walls. In those early years after Harry's marriage to Meghan, the royal family had put forward a united front. Public appearances featured laughter, coordinated outfits, and the promise that the so-called Fab Four, William, Kate, Harry, and Meghan, would usher the monarchy into a new era of relevance and relatability. But insiders already knew the reality was not nearly as polished as the glossy photographs. Staff whispered about differences in work ethic, disagreements over protocol, and Meghan's insistence on reshaping traditions that had stood for decades. To those within the palace machine, her presence was like a sharp gust against an old structure, not strong enough to topple it at once, but persistent enough to force cracks wider. William, ever the cautious heir, grew more uneasy with each headline. Meghan was not just any royal consort. She was an actress, a figure accustomed to the spotlight and the narrative control that Hollywood demanded. The press adored her initially, painting her as a fresh, diverse voice in a family often criticized for its outdated image. But with adoration came scrutiny, and soon every gesture, every fashion choice, every whispered rumor became fodder for endless commentary. For William, who had spent years carefully curating a measured, almost understated presence, the storm that swirled around his brother's wife was alarming. To him, it wasn't just attention, it was volatility. Harry, on the other hand, had found in Meghan a partner who seemed to share his frustrations with the institution. He had long been uneasy in the shadow of his brother's destiny. Where William embraced the crown as his responsibility, Harry saw it as a cage. Meghan's arrival amplified that sentiment, validating his sense that life could be more than ceremonial appearances and duty-bound obligations. The gathering storm grew stronger as Harry leaned more toward personal freedom, while William clung tighter to the weight of tradition. The two brothers, once inseparable, began to drift into opposing worlds, their every disagreement magnified by the cameras that never looked away. The middle of this chapter belongs to the slow burn of media battles. The British press, notorious for its ferocity, had always scrutinized royals, but with Meghan came a new kind of war. Accusations of racism, bias, and unfair treatment swirled. The palace tried to remain silent, clinging to the age-old mantra of never complain, never explain. But silence is not the absence of sound. It is the breeding ground of speculation. Stories grew wild. from alleged feuds between Meghan and Kate to explosive arguments behind closed doors. Each new headline was another flash of lightning in the sky, illuminating the storm gathering on the horizon. For William, every controversy was not just about Meghan and Harry. It was about the monarchy itself. He knew better than anyone that the crown survives not by yielding to chaos, but by projecting stability, dignity, and continuity. He had lived through the nightmare of his mother's public unraveling, watched the institution stagger under criticism, and seen how quickly the tide of public opinion could turn. To him, the stakes were larger than brotherly loyalty. The institution had to come first, and Harry's choices threatened its very foundations. The storm intensified in 2019 when Harry and Meghan began to take steps that openly diverged from palace expectations. They launched their own brand, Sussex Royal, signaling ambitions that extended beyond the constraints of the monarchy. They spoke openly in interviews about their struggles, their discontent, and their frustrations with the media. It was a striking departure from the silence William and Kate maintained, and it laid bare the growing rift. For the first time, the brothers no longer looked like allies battling the pressures of royal life. They looked like adversaries fighting on opposite sides. By the time Harry and Meghan announced their decision to step back from royal duties in early 2020, the storm had become a full-scale tempest. William's disappointment was no longer a matter of private irritation but a deeply personal wound. Reports surfaced of heated conversations, of William feeling blindsided by Harry's announcement, of trust shattered between the brothers. It was as though the last threads holding them together had been cut without warning. The monarchy scrambled to adapt, drafting new rules, negotiating new boundaries, and trying to salvage dignity from the chaos. But everyone knew the damage was done. And yet, even then, the storm had not reached its peak. There was still, at least in theory, a path back. If Harry and Meghan had chosen to keep ties warm, if compromises had been made, reconciliation might have been possible. The Queen's steady hand offered some hope, a reminder that time and patience could heal even deep divisions. But as months turned into years, and as interviews, documentaries, and tell-all books poured fuel onto the fire, the possibility of healing became more remote. The storm was no longer gathering. It was bearing down, its winds tearing through the walls of family and tradition alike. The end of this chapter sets the stage for what comes next. By the time William prepared his announcement, the rift had become more than a personal matter. It was no longer about disagreements over duty or media portrayals. It had transformed into a question of survival. Could the monarchy continue to function with Harry and Meghan tethered to it, or would their ongoing controversies and independence tear it apart? The storm had reached its breaking point, and William knew the choice he made would define his future reign. This is the storm before the thunderclap, the build-up before the shocking announcement. And as the skies darkened over the House of Windsor, one truth became undeniable. The monarchy was about to change forever. When Prince William was born in 1982, the world looked at him with an expectation unlike any other child of his generation. He wasn't simply Diana and Charles's first son. He was the future king of England, a child destined to inherit a crown that carried with it centuries of history, responsibility, and sacrifice. From the very beginning, William's life was divided between two worlds: the intimate, private world of being Diana's boy, full of laughter and warmth, and the public world of being the heir, where every step he took was framed by duty. That sense of responsibility grew heavier with every passing year. As a boy, he saw firsthand how brutal the monarchy could be on those who didn't fit its mold. He witnessed the disintegration of his parents' marriage under the glare of the media. He walked behind his mother's coffin as the eyes of millions watched, the cameras capturing his grief for the world to consume. Those experiences carved into William the understanding that personal emotions must often be set aside for the survival of the monarchy. Duty was not a choice, it was his destiny. As he grew older, William learned to balance the demands of tradition with his own humanity. He became a husband, then a father, and found in Kate a partner who shared his commitment to responsibility. Together, they embodied what the monarchy wanted the public to see: stability, grace, and a forward-looking vision of the crown. Yet even in the quiet of their home, William carried the burden of knowing that every decision he made wasn't just about his family. It was about the monarchy's survival. The crown rested on his father's head, but the weight of the future already pressed heavily on his shoulders. It is against this backdrop that William's decision to formally announce Harry and Meghan's banishment becomes so striking. For William, the issue wasn't merely about disagreements or personality clashes. It was about the very essence of his duty. Every monarch must, at some point, choose between personal loyalty and the institution they represent. For William, that moment came sooner than anyone expected, and it came in the form of his younger brother. The middle of this chapter exposes the emotional cost of that burden. Imagine the late-night conversations William must have had with Kate, wrestling with the impossible choice before him. On one hand, he loved his brother, the boy who had stood beside him through the worst days of his life. On the other, he was the heir to the throne, sworn to preserve the monarchy above all else. The question must have echoed in his mind relentlessly. Do I protect my brother, or do I protect the crown? It is easy to forget how much William has already given up in service to duty. Unlike Harry, who could carve his own path away from the monarchy, William's entire life was predetermined. There was no exit door for him, no second act waiting in Hollywood or California. He was bound to the monarchy as tightly as flesh to bone. And so, when faced with the escalating scandals, interviews, and public attacks that came from Harry and Meghan's independence, William had only one path. He could not afford to appear weak, indecisive, or indulgent. To do so would not only endanger the monarchy, but also signal to the world that he was unfit to reign. The burden of duty also meant that William had to consider not just his own reign, but the legacy he would leave for his children. George, Charlotte, and Louis would one day inherit the world he shaped. Would he pass on to them a monarchy fractured by division, weakened by constant scandal? Or would he demonstrate the strength and resolve necessary to protect the institution so it could endure for generations more? This forward-looking vision shaped his actions. The announcement wasn't only about Harry and Meghan. It was about George's future crown. The echoes of history are impossible to ignore here. William must have been haunted by the story of Edward VIII, the king who abdicated in 1936 to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. That decision shook the monarchy to its core, nearly destroying it. For decades, Edward and Wallis lived in exile, symbols of what happens when personal desires clash with the duties of the crown. The parallels to Harry and Meghan were impossible to ignore. Another American wife, another royal choosing personal freedom over the institution, another risk to the monarchy's stability. William knew history, and he knew the monarchy could not afford to relive that nightmare. By the end of this chapter, the gravity of William's position becomes painfully clear. This was never about sibling rivalry alone. It was about the impossible burden of choosing between love and duty, between the bond of brothers and the legacy of 1,000 years. William chose duty because he had to. And while the world may debate whether he acted out of necessity or cruelty, one truth remains unshakable. He is the heir, and heirs cannot afford the luxury of personal indulgence. The storm had gathered. The burden of the crown was now pressing harder than ever. William's announcement was not simply a statement. It was the first act of a man stepping fully into his role as future king. The year 2020 will forever be marked as a turning point in the history of the House of Windsor. It was the year Harry and Meghan decided to step back from royal duties, a decision that not only shook the foundations of the monarchy, but also redefined the way the world viewed royalty in the modern age. The move was unprecedented in its boldness, and yet in hindsight, the signs of discontent had been building for years. To understand why their exit triggered such an earthquake in the royal family, one must trace the story of how two people who once stood at the very heart of Britain's beloved institution came to renounce it. In the beginning, Meghan's arrival was met with fascination and excitement. She was charismatic, articulate, and had a backstory that made her unlike any royal spouse before her. An American actress of mixed heritage, she represented a fresh chapter in a monarchy often criticized for being outdated and out of touch. The fairy tale seemed to write itself. A prince, long regarded as the mischievous yet lovable spare, finally finding his true love in a woman who symbolized change and progress. For a while, the narrative was irresistible. The world tuned in to watch their wedding in 2018, a spectacle filled with hope, symbolism, and the promise of a modern monarchy. But behind the glitz and glamour, the early cracks were forming. Meghan, accustomed to the independence of a Hollywood career, found the rigid traditions of royal life suffocating. Every move was scrutinized, every word weighed, and every gesture magnified. For Harry, who had long felt like an outsider within the institution, Meghan's struggles mirrored his own lifelong discomfort. Instead of pulling him closer to the family, her frustrations gave voice to his own buried resentment. Together, they became a united front, pushing against centuries of protocol. The middle of this chapter belongs to the critical months when tension boiled over. Meghan faced relentless attacks in the press, some fair, others viciously biased. Headlines dissected her family background, her estranged father, her wardrobe, even the way she cradled her baby bump. For Harry, this treatment was unbearable. Memories of his mother, Princess Diana, hounded by paparazzi until her tragic death, resurfaced with painful clarity. He was determined not to let history repeat itself. Meghan's tears, her isolation, and her sense of being unwelcome within palace walls only deepened his resolve. By 2019, the couple began to openly distance themselves from the royal family's traditional structures. Their decision to sue certain tabloids was a defiant move, signaling that they would no longer tolerate the silent endurance the Windsors were famous for. The launch of their own brand, Sussex Royal, further revealed their desire to operate independently. And then came the breaking point. Their announcement in January 2020 that they would step back as senior royals and split their time between the United Kingdom and North America. The announcement landed like a bombshell. Even Queen Elizabeth, known for her calm composure, was reportedly blindsided by the timing and manner of the declaration. Instead of consulting the family in private, Harry and Meghan posted their decision online for the world to see. It was a bold, almost rebellious act that signaled not just dissatisfaction, but rejection of the royal system itself. Overnight, Megxit became the word on everyone's lips. Commentators debated its meaning, royal experts speculated about its impact, and the public split into factions, those who saw Harry and Meghan as victims breaking free from oppression, and those who viewed them as ungrateful deserters. The months that followed were consumed by negotiations. Could they keep their titles while living abroad? Could they use royal as part of their commercial ventures? Where would their security come from? And who would pay for it? The answers to these questions revealed the growing chasm between the couple and the monarchy. The Queen was firm. They could not pick and choose. You were either in or out. And Harry and Meghan, by their own design, were out. The exit itself was not just a physical move across the Atlantic, but an emotional severing of ties. They left behind Frogmore Cottage, relinquished their roles in royal patronages, and began a new chapter in California. The image of Harry walking away from the only life he had ever known, with Meghan by his side, was both poignant and polarizing. To some, it was the image of a man protecting his wife and child at all costs. To others, it was the betrayal of a son turning his back on Queen and country. By the end of this chapter, one truth is undeniable. Their royal exit was not just a decision about lifestyle. It was the catalyst that set in motion everything that followed. The interviews, the tell-all memoirs, the rift with William, and ultimately, the announcement that banished them for good. Without Megxit, the storm might never have grown into the hurricane that William would one day face. But once the decision was made, the line between Harry and Meghan and the monarchy was no longer a line at all. It was a chasm, widening with every word they spoke and every step they took away from the crown. Their exit was not the end of their story, but the beginning of a new kind of war. A war of narratives, a war of loyalty, and a war of legacy. And as the dust settled from their departure, the royal family braced itself for the battles that would follow. When William stood before the cameras to announce that Harry, Meghan, and their children were being permanently removed from the monarchy's line of succession and privileges, the weight of those words reverberated far beyond Buckingham Palace. For the institution, it was a calculated move meant to safeguard its future. For Harry and Meghan, it was a devastating blow. But for the children, Archie Harrison and Lilibet Diana, it was something else entirely. They became symbols in a struggle that was never of their making, figures caught in the crossfire of a battle between crown and kin. From the moment Archie was born in May 2019, the question of his role in the monarchy was a subject of endless speculation. Unlike William's children, whose positions as heirs were predetermined, Archie's future was less clear. Would he carry a title? Would he grow up in the public eye? Or would he be shielded from the weight of royal expectation? Harry and Meghan's choices leaned toward privacy, a decision that created tension with the traditions of the institution. Photos were withheld, christening details guarded, and access restricted. To the public, this secrecy was unusual. To the monarchy, it was a breach of the unwritten contract that royalty must always balance private lives with public duties. The middle of this chapter delves into the complexities of identity that Archie and Lilibet were born into. They are Windsor children by blood, yet also California children by upbringing. They are heirs to centuries of royal history, yet simultaneously raised in a culture far removed from Buckingham Palace's gilded halls. The announcement that stripped them of succession rights symbolically severed that dual identity. It told the world that these children, innocent and unknowing, no longer belonged to the future of Britain's monarchy. They were now defined not by their lineage, but by their parents' choices. For William, the decision must have been agonizing. He is not only the heir to the throne, but also an uncle. He has watched George, Charlotte, and Louis grow within the structure of the monarchy, aware of the sacrifices that come with privilege. To extend those responsibilities to Archie and Lilibet, when their parents had so forcefully rejected the institution, was untenable. In William's mind, the children could not both live outside the system and benefit from it. Yet one cannot help but wonder what toll such a decision will take on the relationships within the family. Will these cousins ever share a childhood bond? Or will history remember them as figures forever separated by decisions made before they could even speak? The emotional undertones are impossible to ignore. Imagine Archie, one day old enough to understand, asking why his cousins carry titles that he does not. Imagine Lilibet learning that her name, chosen to honor both the Queen and Diana, has been written out of the royal narrative. These questions will not be answered by institutions or history books. They will be answered within their own hearts. And that is where the deepest wounds may form. The public, too, reacted strongly to the children's involvement. For some, the removal of their succession rights was a necessary step to protect the monarchy's integrity. For others, it seemed cruel to punish children for their parents' actions. The image of innocence caught in the midst of royal politics struck a chord worldwide. Commentators drew parallels to past royal children who bore the consequences of dynastic disputes, from the children of Henry VIII's divided marriages to the heirs of monarchs who were exiled. Once again, history seemed to be repeating itself. But perhaps the most haunting element of this chapter is the uncertainty of the children's future. Without royal privileges, their lives will be shaped entirely by Harry and Meghan's path. Will they embrace Hollywood, becoming fixtures of celebrity culture? Will they resent the decisions made on their behalf? Or will they live quietly, distant from both the monarchy and the spotlight? These are the questions that add layers of complexity to William's announcement. By the end of this chapter, the audience must sit with the uncomfortable truth that the monarchy's decisions are never confined to those who make them. They ripple outward, touching the innocent and shaping lives that had no choice in the matter. Archie and Lilibet did not choose to be royal, nor did they choose to be excluded. They were born into a story written long before their arrival, and now they must live with its consequences. The world had been waiting for weeks, perhaps even years, for a moment like this. Whispers about divisions within the royal family had circulated endlessly, fueled by interviews, memoirs, and press leaks. But until William stepped forward, nothing had carried the finality of official confirmation. When the announcement finally came, it was not delivered with spectacle or dramatics. It was spoken with the calm, measured tone of a man who understood the gravity of every word he uttered. That calmness made it even more devastating. The setting itself was symbolic. William did not speak from behind palace gates or cloistered in the safety of royal tradition. Instead, he chose a modern platform. An address recorded for both broadcast television and online streaming. The decision ensured that his words would reach the widest possible audience, from loyal subjects in Britain to viewers across the globe. Behind him, the backdrop was simple but heavy with meaning. The crest of the monarchy, a subtle reminder that this was not William the brother speaking, but William the heir, speaking on behalf of an institution that had survived for centuries. When he began, his voice was steady, every syllable deliberate. There was no anger, no theatrical emotion, only the certainty of someone who had weighed this moment for months. He acknowledged the difficulties of recent years, the choices made by Harry and Meghan to distance themselves from royal duties, and the pain those choices had caused. Then came the line that struck like a hammer on stone. Effective immediately, Harry, Meghan, and their children were to be permanently removed from the line of succession and would no longer hold privileges associated with the monarchy. The statement was short, decisive, and impossible to misunderstand. For a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The announcement was both shocking and inevitable. It had been building for years, yet hearing it aloud transformed speculation into reality. It was not just family politics anymore. It was history being written. The imagery of William delivering the words, his face expressionless yet resolute, will be etched into the collective memory of this generation. The middle of this chapter explores the immediate ripples of that moment. Inside the palace, aides scrambled to manage the fallout. Phones buzzed with urgent calls from advisors, family members, and political figures. Statements were drafted, press releases prepared, and senior royals informed. King Charles, though technically the reigning monarch, had allowed his son to take the lead on this issue, signaling both trust and acknowledgement that William would soon be king himself. This was not just William speaking as a prince. It was William preparing the public for his reign. The press erupted within minutes. Tabloids rushed to print dramatic headlines. Online news sites crashed under the weight of global traffic, and talk shows scrambled to book royal experts. The framing of the announcement varied wildly. Some called it a bold act of leadership, proof that William had the strength to modernize the monarchy. Others labeled it a betrayal, a cold rejection of family in favor of power. On social media, hashtags spread like wildfire, with debates raging across platforms. The world was divided, but no one could deny that the moment was monumental. What makes the announcement so compelling is the human dimension woven into its institutional power. William was not merely declaring the removal of names from a line of succession. He was cutting ties with his brother, the boy who had once walked beside him through their mother's funeral procession. For all the polished delivery and professional staging, the undercurrent of pain was unmistakable. In that moment, viewers were not just hearing an heir fulfill his duty. They were witnessing a man sacrificing personal bonds for the sake of the crown. By the end of this chapter, the reality of the announcement begins to sink in. There was no going back, no chance of reversal. The permanence of William's words echoed louder than any interview or memoir ever could. This was history, sealed not by gossip, but by declaration. The monarchy had drawn a line in the sand, and Harry and Meghan now stood firmly on the other side. As the cameras faded and the news cycle accelerated, one truth became unavoidable. This was not merely a royal family dispute. It was the moment when William embraced his destiny fully, showing the world that he would not hesitate to make the hard choices necessary for the survival of the crown. And in doing so, he set into motion a chain of consequences that would redefine the monarchy for decades to come. The minutes and hours following William's announcement carried a tension that could almost be touched. Inside palace walls, where silence is often the preferred response to controversy, there was no avoiding the tremors of what had just been declared to the world. Staff members who had grown used to carefully controlling narratives found themselves confronted with a decision that had no precedent in modern royal history. Phones rang without pause, corridors filled with hurried footsteps, and whispers traveled faster than official statements. The monarchy had just altered its own structure, and everyone within its orbit was left scrambling to process the new reality. King Charles was among the first to respond behind closed doors. Though William had delivered the words, many knew the king had approved the move. Still, approval and experience are two different things. For Charles, whose reign had already been tested by controversies both personal and political, the fallout carried a heavy sting. He had once tried to balance compassion for his son Harry with his responsibility to the crown. Now, the bridge was not simply strained, it was burned. Reports later suggested that Charles, while supportive of William's decision, retreated into reflection, aware that history would remember not only his reign, but also his role in allowing the monarchy to sever ties with his younger son. Camilla, queen consort, reportedly received the news with the same pragmatism she had long displayed. To her, this was another battle in the ongoing war to protect the monarchy's survival. She had endured decades of being cast as the villain, and she knew that survival often required ruthless decisions. While others agonized over the human cost, Camilla focused on the institutional necessity. Her stance added a colder edge to the palace's response, one that showed unity behind William's leadership even if emotions behind closed doors told a different story. Princess, and, known for her no-nonsense demeanor, was perhaps the most vocal in private discussions. To her, the monarchy's endurance had always depended on duty above all else. She had lived that principle her entire life, rarely complaining, never seeking the limelight, and committing to her responsibilities with a stoic resilience. The idea of Harry and Meghan living abroad, profiting from royal connections while discarding the obligations that came with them, was anathema to her. William's announcement, in her eyes, was not only justified but long overdue. Her support provided William with a crucial ally inside the family, someone who could steady the institution's inner circle. Kate, however, felt the weight differently. As William's wife and closest confidant, she had witnessed the years of strain between the brothers. She had seen William struggle with the decision, agonize over the cost to their family, and ultimately commit to the path of no return. While she stood firmly at his side, offering quiet strength, there was no denying the emotional toll. Kate understood that her children's future had just been altered too. George, Charlotte, and Louis would one day inherit a monarchy that had drawn sharp boundaries against their cousins. The reality that family bonds would forever be overshadowed by this decision was a burden she carried silently. The staff, from senior advisors to junior aides, were caught in the storm. Some had long warned that Harry and Meghan's continued association with the monarchy posed risks that outweighed the benefits. Others had hoped for reconciliation, believing that time and diplomacy could heal the rift. With William's announcement, all ambiguity vanished. Lines had been drawn, and staff were forced to adapt. Departments responsible for communications scrambled to issue consistent messaging. Security teams adjusted protocols, knowing that Harry and Meghan's status had changed in ways that affected their protection. Legal advisors combed through documents to ensure the removal from succession was airtight. Beyond logistics, the atmosphere in the palace was one of unease. For decades, the monarchy had projected unity, even when fractures were obvious. Now, the fracture had been made official. Some staff members whispered that the palace had sacrificed family for survival. Others argued it was the only possible outcome, that William had shown the strength his future kingship required. But even among those who supported the decision, there was an acknowledgement that something irreversible had been done. The fallout extended into the corridors of government. Prime ministers and senior officials were informed of the announcement in advance, but the ripple effects demanded immediate attention. Constitutional advisors reassured Parliament that the succession line had been lawfully updated, but political figures knew that such a move carried broader implications. The monarchy was a symbol of stability, and any decision that exposed deep family division risked weakening that symbol in the eyes of the public. Behind closed doors, debates arose about how to support the monarchy while preventing the fallout from distracting from national governance. The end of this chapter reflects on the silence that blanketed the palace after the initial frenzy. Once the phones quieted, once the frantic meetings concluded, those who lived and worked within the institution were left with the knowledge that nothing would ever be the same. Relationships had been severed, the public had been startled, and the monarchy had entered uncharted waters. For William, the announcement had been made, but the true test was only beginning. The palace was steadying itself after the shockwave, but the aftershocks promised to continue for months, perhaps even years. The immediate fallout revealed one truth. The monarchy had chosen survival over sentiment, and in doing so, it had reshaped not only its own future, but but also the personal futures of every member within its walls. The announcement struck Harry and Meghan with the force of a hammer. Though the signs had been building for years and whispers of an official removal from succession had circulated in media circles, the finality of William's words landed with a shock they could not disguise. For Harry, the statement carried not just political weight, but the crushing reality that his own brother, the boy who had once been his closest companion, had effectively severed him from the family's future. For Meghan, the announcement confirmed every suspicion she had harbored about her place in the monarchy, turning a personal feud into a permanent exile. In the hours after the broadcast, their team in California scrambled to craft a response. Advisors debated whether to release a formal statement, issue a measured interview, or allow silence to speak for itself. Meghan was adamant that they should not remain quiet. To her, silence was complicity, and complicity would only reinforce the narrative that they were powerless. Harry, however, hesitated. The conflict tore at him. Part of him longed to defend his family against what felt like an institutional betrayal, while another part feared that any response would only deepen the chasm. Their eventual response combined both defiance and pain. In a statement circulated through their spokesperson, they acknowledged the announcement but framed it as yet another example of the institution prioritizing image over humanity. Meghan's fingerprints were evident in the language, phrases that emphasized resilience, independence, and the need to protect their children from what they saw as a toxic environment. Harry's voice came through in the undercurrent of sadness, an acknowledgement that family bonds had been sacrificed in the process. The middle of this chapter explores the deeper emotions behind their public words. For Harry, the loss was personal in a way the world could barely comprehend. This was not simply about titles or privileges, it was about identity. He had been born into a world where duty and family were indistinguishable, where his role was tied inseparably to the monarchy. To be cut off was to lose a piece of himself, even if he had long questioned whether that piece ever truly belonged to him. The pain of realizing that his brother had delivered the words was sharper than any headline. William's calm tone may have reassured the public, but to Harry, it was the voice of abandonment. Meghan's response was layered with both outrage and vindication. From the moment she entered the royal family, she had felt the coldness of tradition and the hostility of the press. The decision to strip her children of their succession rights and privileges confirmed what she had always feared, that she and her family would never be fully accepted. Yet within that pain, Meghan also found resolve. The announcement, in her eyes, freed them from the last vestiges of obligation. They no longer had to straddle the line between monarchy and independence. They were, for better or worse, untethered. Publicly, Meghan projected strength. In private, however, those close to her described the decision as a profound blow. She worried about Archie and Lilibet's future, about the narratives that would follow them as they grew older. She questioned how they would reconcile their heritage with the knowledge that their own uncle had declared them outsiders. The duality of her public defiance and private grief underscored the complexity of her position. In the days that followed, Harry and Meghan leaned on their allies. Hollywood friends offered support, fellow celebrities expressed sympathy, and media platforms in the United States provided a stage for their narrative. Yet even in sympathetic circles, questions emerged. Had they anticipated this move? Did their interviews, memoirs, and public criticisms of the monarchy accelerate the decision? Could reconciliation ever be possible after such a declaration? Each question placed them in the uncomfortable position of defending not just their choices, but their very identity as a family. The end of this chapter lingers on the silence between the brothers. Harry reportedly reached out to William privately, seeking some kind of explanation or personal acknowledgement beyond the official words. The attempt was met with guarded responses, filtered through advisors and intermediaries. Whatever conversation they might have had as brothers was now buried under layers of protocol and mistrust. For Harry, it was the final confirmation that the bond they once shared was broken. For Meghan, the path forward was clearer. She saw the announcement as an opportunity to fully embrace a new life beyond the monarchy's shadow. For Harry, the decision cut deeper, leaving wounds that would not easily heal. Together, their response was both a rejection of the institution that cast them out and a declaration of independence. But beneath the statements and appearances, The emotional fallout told a more tragic story, a family divided, perhaps beyond repair. The moment William's announcement reached the public, the world's media reacted with a force that rivaled the event itself. Television networks broke into live coverage, social media platforms flooded with hashtags, and newspapers prepared extra editions. The story was too significant to wait until the next day's headlines. It demanded immediate attention. The removal of Harry, Meghan, and their children from succession and royal privileges was not just another chapter in the Windsor saga. It was a turning point that forced even casual observers to stop and pay attention. In the first hours, broadcasters in Britain scrambled to assemble panels of royal correspondents, historians, and commentators. Some praised William's decision as bold and necessary, a sign that he was ready to take on the role of monarch with strength and decisiveness. Others condemned it as cruel, calling it a betrayal of family that placed power above love. The debates grew heated, with every word of William's statement dissected and replayed. Clips of his calm delivery circulated endlessly, accompanied by dramatic captions. The crown protects itself, brothers divided, succession reshaped. Across the Atlantic, the coverage took on a different tone. In the United States, where Meghan and Harry had built their post-royal lives, networks leaned heavily into themes of injustice and exclusion. Commentators framed the announcement as proof of the couple's victimization, evidence that the monarchy had never truly accepted Meghan. Morning talk shows invited celebrities to weigh in, creating a blend of gossip and cultural commentary that blurred the line between news and entertainment. The divide in coverage underscored the larger cultural clash. In Britain, the monarchy was a national institution. In America, it was a spectacle, and Meghan and Harry were central characters in a drama that audiences couldn't resist. The middle of this chapter belongs to the frenzy online. Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became battlegrounds where supporters and critics waged war with hashtags and viral posts. Memes spread rapidly, some mocking William's severity, others portraying Harry and Meghan as tragic heroes cast out of an ancient kingdom. Threads compared the situation to Shakespearean drama, with William framed as the dutiful heir and Harry as the exiled prince. The sheer volume of posts was staggering, with millions of mentions within hours, making it one of the most discussed royal stories of the decade. Traditional newspapers, too, found themselves swept into the storm. The British tabloids, long known for their obsession with Meghan, splashed sensational headlines across their front pages. Some highlighted the institutional strength of the monarchy, praising William for defending tradition. Others took a harsher line, framing Meghan as the root of the chaos. Broadsheets, more restrained in tone, focused on the constitutional implications and historical parallels, drawing comparisons to the abdication crisis of 1936. International outlets, from France's Le Monde to Australia's Sydney Morning Herald, ran detailed analyses, each tailoring the story to their audience's fascination with royalty. In the frenzy, one detail stood out. The announcement's impact was not confined to politics or tradition. It had become entertainment. Streaming services began re-editing documentaries about the royal family, rushing to add context to the new development. Podcasts devoted special episodes to dissecting the announcement, inviting royal watchers and even psychologists to speculate on the family's internal dynamics. Book publishers quietly updated drafts of upcoming works, knowing that this moment had reshaped the narrative forever. Yet amid the noise, there was a quieter undercurrent of reflection. Journalists who had covered Diana in the 1990s spoke of the parallels, recalling how family disputes had once shaken the monarchy to its core. Others questioned whether the institution, by making such a definitive move, had underestimated the global sympathy for Harry and Meghan. The media frenzy was not just about reporting. It was about shaping the story, deciding whether this was an act of necessary leadership or a ruthless betrayal. By the end of this chapter, the scope of the frenzy is undeniable. The story was no longer confined to the United Kingdom or even to the English-speaking world. It had spread globally, with every outlet offering its interpretation, every platform amplifying the drama. William's announcement was now a piece of history carried on the currents of modern media, its meaning filtered through endless voices. For the monarchy, the frenzy was both a weapon and a threat. It ensured that William's decision could not be ignored, cementing its permanence in public consciousness. But it also meant the narrative was no longer under royal control. Once the words had left William's lips, they belonged to the world, to be debated, dissected, and dramatized endlessly. And that, perhaps, was the true test of the monarchy's resilience. Not just the act of banishment, but the ability to withstand the storm of voices that followed. When William's announcement hit the airwaves, it was not confined to palace walls or media studios. It landed directly in the living rooms, pubs, offices, and online feeds of millions of people. For the British public, the monarchy has always been both distant and intimate, an institution cloaked in tradition yet woven into the everyday fabric of national life. The decision to banish Harry, Meghan, and their children from succession was not simply a royal decree. It was a moment that demanded everyone form an opinion. And in true fashion, the public did not hesitate to respond. In Britain, the reaction split almost instantly into camps. For some, particularly traditionalists who had long believed Harry and Meghan's independence undermined the crown, the announcement was a sigh of relief. To them, William had done what was necessary to preserve the dignity of the monarchy. Pubs in small towns echoed with conversations that mixed pride with frustration. Pride that William had shown strength, frustration that the family drama had dragged on for so long. Older generations, who remembered the turbulence of Diana's era, often said it was better to act decisively now than allow years of scandal to erode the monarchy further. But not all voices celebrated. Younger Britons, already skeptical of the monarchy's relevance, saw the move as unnecessarily harsh. University debates spilled into late-night conversations in student bars, where many questioned whether the monarchy had learned anything from the past. Some argued that by banishing Harry and Meghan, the institution had alienated the very generation it needed most, the young people who were already questioning its future. Social media platforms amplified this divide, with British users arguing passionately over whether William had acted as a leader or as a cold enforcer of tradition. The middle of this chapter turns to the international reaction, which was just as intense, but colored by cultural lenses. In the United States, where Harry and Meghan had rebuilt their lives, the public mood leaned heavily in their favor. Talk shows framed the announcement as a rejection of Meghan's identity and a dismissal of their efforts to forge a new path. Opinion writers accused the monarchy of clinging to outdated traditions and failing to embrace change. On the West Coast, where Hollywood circles had embraced Meghan, the decision was read as proof of the family's hostility toward her from the very beginning. For many Americans, this was not about monarchy versus rebellion, but about fairness versus cruelty. In other parts of the world, the reaction reflected both fascination and judgment. In Commonwealth nations, where loyalty to the crown has long been complicated by histories of colonialism, the move carried symbolic weight. Commentators in Canada and Australia asked whether the monarchy, by casting out Harry and Meghan, was signaling that it could no longer adapt to global realities. In Africa, where Meghan's heritage had once been celebrated as a symbol of inclusion, many expressed disappointment that her children were effectively erased from the line of succession. In Europe, particularly in countries with their own royal families, analysts debated whether such a move would ever be possible in their monarchies, comparing the Windsor's approach to their own traditions. Public protests did not erupt in the streets, but the debates were loud enough to feel like one. British radio shows received record call-ins, with ordinary citizens airing raw emotions. Some callers demanded that Harry and Meghan stop capitalizing on their royal connection if they had rejected its responsibilities. Others argued passionately that they had been driven away, forced to defend themselves against relentless attacks. The announcement had not silenced discussion. It had fueled it, making the monarchy the centerpiece of national conversation once again. At the heart of the public reaction was a question that refused to go away. Was William's announcement an act of leadership or an act of betrayal? For those who believed in the monarchy's survival, it was leadership, clear, firm, and unyielding. For those who valued family over institution, it was betrayal, a cold severing of bonds that should have been sacred. That tension between crown and kin, between tradition and humanity, defined the conversations in Britain and beyond. The end of this chapter leaves us with a picture of a world divided. In Britain, The monarchy had secured stability at the cost of personal compassion. In America, Harry and Meghan had become martyrs of modern independence. In the Commonwealth, the decision raised fresh doubts about the relevance of the crown. And globally, the story became another example of how one family's choices could ripple outward, sparking debates about tradition, identity, and survival. The public reaction was not a single chorus, but a cacophony, each voice carrying its own perspective, each argument shaped by culture, history, and personal belief. What united them all was the recognition that this was no ordinary royal squabble. This was a turning point, one that forced the world to ask, what is the monarchy's place in the modern age, and what price must be paid to preserve it? Every institution that lasts for centuries survives not because it avoids crises, but because it learns when to adapt and when to cut loose. The British monarchy has weathered invasions, civil wars, abdications, and scandals. Each time, it has reshaped itself just enough to endure. William's announcement was not merely a family decision, but part of that long survival instinct, a reflex born of history. To many inside the palace, the choice was not about whether to protect Harry and Meghan. It was about whether the monarchy itself could withstand further strain. To understand why survival required such a drastic step, one must look at the monarchy's fragile position in the 21st century. It no longer wields political power in the way monarchies once did. Its authority rests on symbolism, tradition, and public trust. Scandals erode that trust, and family discord magnified by media exposure can damage the very foundation on which the institution stands. The Windsors had learned this in the 1990s, when Diana's interviews and Charles's scandals nearly shattered the monarchy's reputation. They had learned it again when Prince Andrew's associations with Jeffrey Epstein plunged the family into disrepute. William's decision was shaped by that memory. Survival demanded sacrifice. The middle of this chapter examines the logic behind William's choice. Harry and Meghan had, in the eyes of the palace, become unpredictable. Their interviews revealed private tensions. Their Netflix projects and podcasts blurred the line between personal branding and royal responsibility. Their public criticisms of the institution gave opponents of the monarchy fuel to argue for its abolition. For William, who was already preparing for the day he would inherit the crown, the risks were clear. To allow Harry and Meghan to remain tied to succession while living freely outside its rules was to court disaster. The monarchy could not afford to carry passengers who refused to row in the same direction. Survival instincts often appear ruthless, and this was no exception. By removing Harry, Meghan, and their children from succession, the monarchy closed a chapter of uncertainty. It signaled to the world that the crown would not hesitate to protect itself, even against its own. The move aligned with centuries of precedent. Monarchs have exiled siblings, stripped relatives of titles, and even imprisoned kin to protect their reign. The survival of the institution always outweighed the survival of personal bonds. William's decision was in that lineage, a modern echo of ancient instincts. But the survival instinct is not only about protecting the present, it is about securing the future. William's reign, and later George's, would be judged on stability. Every headline about Harry and Meghan threatened to overshadow that. Every public dispute risked eroding the dignity of the monarchy. To act decisively now was, in William's view, to protect what was still to come. It was not only about survival in his generation, but survival in the generations that would follow. The public may see cruelty in this, but inside the institution, it is framed as pragmatism. The monarchy does not operate on the same emotional logic as families do. It operates on legacy, on centuries of tradition, and on the unrelenting weight of continuity. The Queen had embodied that pragmatism all her life, prioritizing duty above personal feeling. William's announcement reflected the same philosophy. Sometimes survival requires a cold hand, not a warm embrace. The end of this chapter reminds us that survival always comes with a cost. The monarchy may have secured stability by removing Harry and Meghan, but it did so at the expense of brotherhood, trust, and compassion. That cost is not easily measured in titles or succession charts. It is measured in the silence of phone calls not made, in the distance of cousins who may grow up strangers, in the ache of a family that can no longer gather as one. The monarchy may survive, but the human beings within it must carry the scars. No matter how carefully the palace tried to frame William's announcement as an act of duty, at its core, it was also the latest and most brutal chapter in a deeply personal story, the unraveling of the bond between two brothers who once seemed inseparable. William and Harry were not just siblings. For much of their lives, they were each other's anchors, united by grief, by their shared experiences of loss, and by the unusual pressures of growing up in the royal spotlight. That bond had endured more than most, and for decades it seemed unbreakable. But William's announcement made clear that the rift was now beyond repair. To understand the depth of that rift, one has to go back to their childhood. The image of the two boys walking behind Princess Diana's coffin in 1997 is etched in the world's memory. William was just 15, Harry only 12, both forced to shoulder a grief most adults could barely endure. In that moment, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared loss. For years afterward, their bond was forged in the fire of Diana's absence. They were more than brothers. They were partners in navigating a life defined by both privilege and trauma. As young men, they were often portrayed as a team. William, the responsible heir, balanced by Harry, the mischievous but loyal spare. They laughed together at sporting events, shared military experiences, and supported each other through early adulthood. Even as their paths began to diverge, their relationship was the one constant. For the public, they symbolized a new era of royal brotherhood, one rooted not in rivalry, but in loyalty. But cracks began to appear when Meghan entered Harry's life. William, cautious by nature, reportedly warned Harry not to rush into marriage. Harry, passionate and protective, saw this as interference. What might have been a brotherly caution became, in Harry's eyes, a lack of support. The seeds of mistrust were planted, and as the years unfolded, they grew into resentment. The middle of this chapter explores the widening divide. Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, and the way he and Meghan spoke publicly about their struggles, only deepened the tension. William felt blindsided by the timing of their departure, seeing it as a betrayal not just of the family, but of him personally. Harry, meanwhile, saw William as a representative of the institution that had failed to protect him and Meghan. The once private bond of brotherhood became entangled in the public machinery of the monarchy. When Harry released his memoir, the rift widened further. In its pages, he recounted arguments with William, painting a picture of tension that the palace had long tried to downplay. William, in contrast, remained silent, embodying the never complain, never explain mantra. But silence can cut deeper than words, and to Harry, it was proof that his brother had chosen the crown over him. By the time William stood to make his announcement, the rift was already a chasm. Delivering those words publicly confirmed what both brothers must have known privately. The bond that had once defined their lives had been sacrificed. William's calm delivery was not the voice of a brother. It was the voice of a future king. And for Harry, that transformation must have been shattering. The end of this chapter reflects on the tragedy of that broken bond. This was not merely a political decision. It was the final act of a story that began with two boys walking behind their mother's coffin, united in grief. That image, once a symbol of resilience, now stands in stark contrast to the reality of their estrangement. The monarchy may endure, but the brothers who once embodied its future now stand on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. When Meghan Markle married into the British royal family, she brought with her not just a personal history, but also a professional world rooted in Hollywood. That world, with its expectations of branding, influence, and narrative control, would soon collide with the monarchy's insistence on restraint and silence. Over time, these two opposing systems, Hollywood's culture of visibility and the monarchy's culture of discretion, would become a defining factor in the tensions that led to William's announcement. For many within the palace, Meghan's ties to Hollywood were not simply part of her past. They were an ever-present influence shaping her choices, her marriage, and ultimately her family's estrangement from the crown. From the outset, Meghan's background as an actress was both celebrated and scrutinized. On one hand, her career made her comfortable in front of cameras, articulate in interviews, and adept at engaging the public. On the other, it set her apart from royal tradition. Actresses, by their nature, are trained to project, to market themselves, and to craft a personal narrative. Royals, by contrast, are taught to hold back, to let the institution define their image, not the individual. This fundamental difference became apparent almost immediately. Where Kate Middleton spent a decade carefully easing into royal life with quiet deference, Meghan arrived with the instincts of someone used to negotiating deals, shaping stories, and asserting control over her image. The middle of this chapter examines the years after Harry and Meghan stepped back from royal duties. Their move to California was not just about finding privacy. It was about building a new empire in the only industry Meghan truly knew: entertainment. The deals with Netflix, Spotify, and various production companies were direct extensions of her Hollywood ties. For their supporters, these ventures represented independence and creativity, proof that Harry and Meghan could thrive outside the constraints of the monarchy. For critics, however, they confirmed the palace's worst fears, that Meghan had never fully left Hollywood behind and had pulled Harry into a world that prized exposure over duty. Every project they undertook was measured against royal tradition. Their high-profile interviews, particularly the one with Oprah Winfrey, resembled not the reserved communications of royals, but the confessional storytelling of celebrities reclaiming their narrative. Documentaries framed their struggles as a modern fairy tale gone wrong. Podcasts blurred the line between personal commentary and public positioning. Each venture amplified the tension between Hollywood and the monarchy. Where the crown valued silence, Hollywood valued voice. Where the monarchy thrived on distance, Hollywood thrived on relatability. Meghan and Harry were caught between these two forces, but their choices made clear where their allegiance lay. For William, Meghan's ties to Hollywood represented not only a personal divergence, but a threat to the monarchy's survival. The royal family could not compete in a world where private conversations might one day become public content, where grievances could be aired for millions to watch, and where image could be crafted outside the institution's control. Hollywood's influence on Meghan was not inherently malicious, but it was incompatible with the monarchy's model. William knew this, and as Meghan and Harry leaned further into media deals and public narratives, the case for severing their royal ties grew stronger. The end of this chapter reflects on the symbolism of Meghan's Hollywood connection. She once walked red carpets. Now she walks the line between royalty and celebrity. That duality, celebrated by some and condemned by others, made reconciliation with the monarchy nearly impossible. William's announcement did not just cut off a brother and sister-in-law. It drew a boundary between two worlds that could never coexist. On one side stood the monarchy, with its centuries of tradition and its survival instinct. On the other side stood Hollywood, with its cameras, contracts, and relentless pursuit of relevance. Meghan's ties ensured that Harry and his children would always straddle that line, and the monarchy chose to make the division permanent. William's announcement did not remain a domestic matter within the borders of the United Kingdom. The monarchy, though primarily symbolic in its political power, has long been one of Britain's most influential tools of soft diplomacy. Royal tours, state banquets, and the carefully cultivated image of unity are designed not only to preserve tradition, but to project stability and continuity to the rest of the world. When the heir to the throne declared that his own brother, sister-in-law, and their children were banished from succession and privileges, that projection cracked. Diplomats, foreign leaders, and Commonwealth nations were forced to interpret what this decision meant, not just for the family, but for Britain's global standing. The immediate diplomatic response was cautious but unmistakably alert. Embassies in London filed urgent reports back to their governments, explaining the shockwave and its potential impact. In Washington, officials quietly monitored the reactions of the American press, aware that Meghan's identity as an American made this more than a royal spat. It was a story with cultural and political implications. Canada and Australia, both Commonwealth realms, fielded questions from their citizens about whether the monarchy's internal strife reflected its relevance in their modern societies. Governments in Africa, where the monarchy's ties to colonial history remain raw, framed the announcement as proof of the crown's inability to embrace diversity in practice, despite gestures of inclusivity. The middle of this chapter considers the diplomatic weight of Harry and Meghan themselves. Before their exit, Harry had been a valuable figure in the monarchy's international outreach. His military service and work with veterans gave him credibility abroad, particularly in nations that valued Britain's defense alliances. Meghan, with her Hollywood background and global recognition, provided the monarchy with an opportunity to reach audiences that had previously felt detached from royal tradition. Together, they were meant to modernize Britain's image abroad. With their banishment, that potential evaporated. Instead, they became counterweights, voices outside the institution who could now define their own narrative without constraint. To foreign observers, this was more than family drama. It was the monarchy losing ambassadors it could not replace. Diplomats also noted the echoes of history. In 1936, Edward VIII's abdication and subsequent exile had forced Britain into a diplomatic balancing act, assuring allies that the monarchy remained stable despite internal upheaval. William's announcement raised similar questions. Was the institution stable, or was this the beginning of a deeper fracture? The palace sought to reassure, emphasizing continuity and unity, but the symbolism of expelling a prince who had married an American was impossible to ignore. To many, it suggested that the monarchy had learned survival at any cost, even if it meant diminishing its international appeal. International media amplified these concerns. French outlets drew comparisons between Britain's monarchy and their own abolished aristocracy, questioning how long the Windsors could endure in a modern republic-driven Europe. In Asia, commentators noted the fascination with Harry and Meghan's global celebrity status, arguing that their exile might weaken Britain's cultural influence abroad. In the Middle East, where royal families hold significant political power, William's decisiveness was interpreted as a display of strength, a willingness to put duty above personal sentiment. The interpretations varied, but the reach of the announcement was undeniable. By the end of this chapter, it becomes clear that the fallout was not contained to palace corridors or British tabloids. The decision rippled outward, forcing allies, critics, and observers across the globe to reconsider the monarchy's place in the world. For William, this was both a risk and a calculation. The monarchy's survival at home demanded firm action, but its soft power abroad depended on appearing united and unshakable. The challenge was whether the world would see the announcement as proof of strength or as a revelation of weakness. In diplomacy, perception is everything. And with William's words echoing across continents, the question of perception became as crucial as the decision itself. Every royal decision comes wrapped in layers of secrecy. The announcement William made was no exception. While his words to the public were measured, final, and seemingly transparent, the truth behind how that decision was reached remains shrouded in speculation. For the public and the press, the official statement was only the surface. Beneath it lay a deeper story, private negotiations, family confrontations, and hidden truths that would never appear on a press release, but inevitably fueled endless debate. In the days that followed, insiders whispered of heated meetings that had taken place in the months leading up to the announcement. Advisors reportedly warned that Harry and Meghan's independence, coupled with their growing influence in America, threatened to overshadow the monarchy's own narrative. The Oprah interview, the Netflix docuseries, and Harry's memoir had each peeled back the curtain of royal life in ways the palace considered unacceptable. Speculation swirled that William had pushed for a final decision earlier than his father might have chosen, determined to show both the public and the institution that he could act decisively as the heir. The middle of this chapter digs into the theories that emerged. Some believe the announcement was timed deliberately, coinciding with the monarchy's efforts to stabilize after recent scandals involving other members of the family. By focusing attention on Harry and Meghan, the palace could redirect scrutiny away from issues closer to home. Others suggested that financial negotiations played a role, with rumors that Harry and Meghan had attempted to secure certain privileges or protections even as they lived independently in California. If true, the refusal of such requests may have been the final spark that led to William's public pronouncement. There were also whispers of private ultimatums. Some sources claimed that Harry had been warned repeatedly that continued criticism of the monarchy would force a response. The memoir in particular, with its detailed accounts of arguments and accusations, was said to have crossed an invisible line. If reconciliation had once been possible, the book had made it untenable. In this telling, William's announcement was not sudden, but the result of cumulative wounds that could no longer be ignored. Even more tantalizing were the rumors of private conversations between William and Harry themselves. What was said in those moments may never be known, but speculation filled the silence. Some imagined William pleading with his brother to reconsider his public attacks. Others suggested the opposite, that William had given warnings in blunt terms, only to be dismissed. Whatever the truth, those conversations, real or imagined, became the focus of speculation as people tried to understand how two brothers could reach such a final break. The end of this chapter reflects on how hidden truths and speculation become part of royal history itself. The monarchy thrives on mystery, but that same mystery feeds curiosity and conspiracy. William's announcement answered one question, but opened many more. Why now? What conversations preceded it? What compromises were attempted and rejected? The absence of answers ensured that the public would continue to speculate, filling in gaps with theories that kept the story alive long after the announcement was made. What the world may never fully know is what William, Harry, and Meghan felt in the private moments behind closed doors. What compromises were considered? What emotions were hidden from the cameras? These unanswered questions add a layer of intrigue that ensures the story will be debated for decades. In the end, the monarchy gave the world only what it wanted to reveal. The rest remains in the shadows, where hidden truths and speculation blur together, shaping how history will remember this moment. Every great decision in royal history leaves behind a legacy, one that lingers long after the headlines fade. William's announcement was no exception. By declaring Harry, Meghan, and their children removed from succession and stripped of privileges, he not only reshaped the present monarchy, but also carved a mark on the future that will define his reign. For the monarchy, this was not just a momentary adjustment, but a deliberate act that would echo through generations, influencing how the institution is perceived, how it functions, and how history remembers it. The immediate legacy was one of strength. To his supporters, William had demonstrated that he was ready to lead. The monarchy has always survived because it has adapted in times of crisis, and this decision was seen as a demonstration of adaptation through decisive action. No longer could Harry and Meghan's controversies disrupt the institution from within. By drawing a boundary, William projected stability, a quality the monarchy desperately needed. Supporters viewed this as his first major act of leadership, a rehearsal for the crown that would one day be his. In this light, the legacy of the decision was confidence. Confidence that William could carry the weight of the crown with firmness and clarity. Yet the middle of this chapter delves into the darker side of that legacy. For many, William's act will forever be remembered as the moment he chose the crown over his brother. History has a way of simplifying stories into narratives of loyalty and betrayal. In this narrative, Harry becomes the exiled prince, cast out not by distant advisors, but by the brother who once shared his grief. Meghan becomes the outsider who challenged an ancient institution and lost. And William becomes the figure who placed survival above compassion. The monarchy may endure, but the family within it will bear scars that will never fade. The legacy also stretches into the lives of the next generation. George, Charlotte, and Louis will grow up in a monarchy defined by their father's decision. They will inherit a system that has already made clear its intolerance for deviation. Their cousins, Archie and Lilibet, will grow up outside that system, shaped by the knowledge that their own bloodline was erased from the official narrative. For future historians, this divide will symbolize the way the monarchy chose to draw sharp boundaries in the 21st century. The cousins themselves, innocent in their youth, may one day become living reminders of a family divided by choices made before they understood them. Internationally, the legacy is more complicated. For some, William's decision is proof of the monarchy's strength, a reassurance to allies that Britain remains stable despite internal strife. For others, it is proof of rigidity, a refusal to embrace modern realities, particularly those involving race, independence, and individual freedom. The legacy in this sense will not only belong to William, but also to the institution itself, shaping how future generations across the globe interpret the monarchy's relevance. The end of this chapter turns to the question of how history will remember William. Kings are not remembered for every word they speak, but for the decisions that define their reign. This announcement, though made before he wore the crown, will likely stand as one of those defining moments. Some will see him as the leader who protected the monarchy from being pulled apart by scandal. Others will see him as the brother who chose duty over blood. The truth, as always, will lie somewhere in between, shaped by the lens through which future generations view it. The legacy of this decision, therefore, is both survival and loss. The monarchy has secured itself, but the price was family unity. William has proven himself as heir, but the cost was his brother's trust. The world has witnessed strength, but it has also seen tragedy. And that tension, between survival and sacrifice, between institution and humanity, is the legacy that will endure. The story of William's announcement is not just another headline in the long saga of the British monarchy. It is a defining moment that will shape how the institution, the family, and the public remember this generation of royals. In a single address, William made clear that the monarchy's survival would always come before sentiment, before compromise, even before brotherhood. That truth is both sobering and revealing, because it exposes the monarchy not as a fairy tale, but as a system built on choices that demand sacrifice. The beginning of this conclusion must return us to the image that started this journey. William standing before the world, his tone steady, his message final. He was not just a brother in that moment. He was the heir, the embodiment of centuries of tradition. His words stripped away the ambiguity that had lingered since Harry and Meghan's departure. The door was no longer ajar, it was shut. The monarchy had spoken, and the exile was complete. That image will endure, not because of its spectacle, but because of its permanence. For the monarchy, the announcement represents survival. An institution that has weathered wars, abdications, and scandals has once again shown its ability to adapt. By removing Harry and Meghan, William signaled that the monarchy would not be pulled apart by dissent. He showed that it would continue to stand as it has for 1,000 years, steady, even when fractured. To those who value tradition, this was reassurance. To those who value compassion, it was a reminder of the cost of survival. The middle of this conclusion reflects on the human cost. Harry and Meghan are not merely names in a succession chart. They are people who once stood within the heart of the family, celebrated as symbols of modern hope. Their children, Archie and Lilibet, are innocents who have been written out of a narrative they did not choose. The rift between William and Harry is not just institutional. It is personal, a wound that cuts through decades of shared history. The brothers who once walked behind their mother's coffin as the world watched now stand on opposite sides of a divide that may never be bridged. For the family, this is tragedy disguised as necessity. Beyond the palace, the decision has stirred the world. In Britain, it has divided the public between those who see William as a strong leader and those who see him as a cold enforcer. In America, it has turned Harry and Meghan into martyrs of independence, cast out for refusing to conform. In the Commonwealth, it has reignited debates about whether the monarchy is still relevant in a global, diverse age. The announcement was not simply a domestic act. It was a global event, one that forced people everywhere to ask what role royalty plays in the modern world. The ending of this conclusion must tie back to the question at the heart of this story. What happens when duty collides with family? William's choice provides one answer. He chose duty. He chose the crown. He chose survival. But the price was heavy, and it will not be forgotten. Harry and Meghan may go on to build lives of their own, untethered from royal obligation. The monarchy may endure, as it always has. But the image of two brothers divided, of children caught in the crossfire, of a family broken for the sake of tradition, those images will linger in the collective memory. In the end, William's announcement is more than a statement. It is a mirror held up to the monarchy itself, reflecting both its strength and its fragility. It shows that the institution can endure, but only by demanding sacrifices that leave scars. It shows that kingship is not a crown of gold but a burden of iron, one that requires choices few could bear. And it leaves us with a final, haunting question. Can a kingdom truly remain whole when its own family lies divided? That is the legacy of this moment. Not just survival, not just loss, but the enduring reminder that behind every crown is a story of sacrifice, and behind every royal decree is a family that must live with its cost. The world watched in disbelief as Prince William stepped forward to make a statement that would send shockwaves through Buckingham Palace, Montecito, and royal circles across the globe. The air was thick with tension, a silence that seemed to stretch beyond the cameras and microphones, as if the very walls of the palace knew that history was being rewritten that day. Questions flooded minds everywhere. What could have prompted such a drastic announcement, and how would it change the face of the monarchy forever? For decades, the British royal family has symbolized tradition, continuity, and a connection to a world that sometimes feels distant and untouchable. They have been figures of fascination, of loyalty, and, for some, of controversy. But nothing could have prepared the public for the news that William was about to deliver. With a steady voice and the poise expected of the future king, he revealed a decision that many had speculated about, yet few truly believed would ever come to pass. Harry and Meghan, along with their children Archie and Lilibet, were being permanently removed from the line of succession and stripped of royal privileges. The announcement did not occur in isolation. It was the culmination of years of tension, of public disagreements, private confrontations, and media storms that followed the Duke and Duchess of Sussex from London to California. William, long seen as the steady hand in the family, had been tasked with preserving the institution of the monarchy amid unprecedented scrutiny. Yet the act of formally banishing his own brother and sister-in-law, people with whom he shared childhood memories, joyous family milestones, and the legacy of a mother whose loss still haunts the nation, is almost unimaginable. The weight of this decision was visible in the gravity of his posture, the measured cadence of his words, and the silence that followed, pregnant with disbelief and emotion. Across the world, reactions were immediate and visceral. Social media exploded with debates, memes, and emotional outpourings from people who either applauded William's decisive leadership or condemned what they saw as a cruel familial fracture. News outlets scrambled to contextualize the announcement, offering analyses, historical parallels, and speculation about the future implications for the monarchy and its place in a modern world that increasingly questions inherited privilege and institutional rigidity. But beyond the headlines and Twitter threads, there was a deeply human story. Behind the ceremonial pomp, there was heartbreak, two brothers torn apart, a family publicly divided, and children caught in the crossfire of decisions they did not choose. This was not just a story about royal protocol or succession. It was a story about family, loyalty, betrayal, and the immense personal cost of leadership. William's decision, framed as a matter of duty to the monarchy, carried the echoes of personal pain, frustration, and perhaps a profound sense of inevitability. As we explore this unprecedented moment in royal history, we will peel back the layers of tension that led to this announcement. We will examine the events that shaped the rift between William and Harry, the rise of Meghan Markle as a polarizing figure within the family and in the public eye, and the steps that culminated in a decision that could redefine the monarchy for generations to come. This is a story of power and principle, of family and duty, of choices that resonate far beyond palace walls. The stakes were high. Every word, every gesture, and every decision from this point forward would be scrutinized, dissected, and debated. Yet in the midst of global attention, the human element, the relationships, the emotions, and the legacies remains at the heart of this story. William's announcement is more than a statement. It is a turning point that forces the world to confront the tension between tradition and transformation, between loyalty and leadership, and between love and responsibility. What would you do if faced with a choice that demanded the severance of familial bonds for the sake of duty? How does one reconcile love with obligation, affection with authority? These questions loom large not just over the royal family, but over anyone navigating the complex terrain of personal loyalty and institutional expectation. In exploring the saga of Harry and Meghan's removal, we glimpse the profound tension that defines the monarchy itself, a balance between public service and private life, between the continuity of tradition and the personal happiness of those who inhabit its roles. As we move through this story, brace yourself for moments of emotional intensity, shocking revelations, and insights into a family whose very existence is under global scrutiny. This is more than royal drama. It is a human story writ large across centuries of history, painted with the brushstrokes of love, conflict, and consequence. The main chapters, 10 to 15 chapters, approximate 26,000 to 27,000 words, will then follow, fully fleshed out with each chapter focusing on key moments. The growing tension between William and Harry, Meghan's entrance into the royal family, media controversies, financial disputes, public appearances, private confrontations, and the gradual build-up to the announcement. Each chapter will feature vivid storytelling, expert quotes, emotional context, and narrative tension. The conclusion, approximate 2,000 words, will bring the story full circle, reflecting on the weight of William's decision, the human cost for Harry, Meghan, and their children, and the enduring legacy of this moment on the monarchy. It will revisit key themes of duty, family, and sacrifice, leaving the audience with a powerful, thought-provoking reflection on the personal and institutional consequences of the banishment. From the outside, the bond between Prince William and Prince Harry often seemed unbreakable. Two brothers, raised within the gilded walls of Buckingham Palace, bonded by shared childhood experiences, mutual love for their mother, and the weighty legacy of a family watched by the world. Yet beneath the public smiles and joint appearances at official engagements, a tension had been quietly mounting, a fissure that, over time, would widen into a chasm that could not easily be bridged. It is important to understand that the roots of this rift are both personal and structural. William, as the elder son, was groomed from birth to assume the mantle of the monarchy. His path was meticulously planned: school, military training, public appearances, charitable endeavors. All steps designed to shape him into a king who would command respect and ensure continuity. Harry, in contrast, grew up with less pressure to conform. He was the spare, a term that in royal context carries a unique burden. On one hand, it allowed freedom and experimentation. On the other, it fostered a sense of exclusion and longing for significance. The death of Princess Diana in 1997 marked a turning point in the brothers' lives. They were thrust into a world of grief under the intense glare of the media, forced to navigate public mourning while simultaneously processing private loss. William, though younger, assumed a protective role over his younger brother, shielding Harry from the worst of the cameras, the relentless public speculation, and the cruel narratives spun by tabloids. For years, their bond appeared unshakable, forged in the crucible of shared trauma and collective resilience. However, cracks began to show in the subsequent decades, often around issues of personal choice, media scrutiny, and the role of the monarchy itself. William, by nature, leaned toward caution and duty. He internalized the principle that the monarchy must endure, even if personal desires had to be subordinated. Harry, by contrast, grew increasingly restless, chafing under constraints he perceived as stifling. This divergence in temperament and philosophy, once minor, became amplified as they reached adulthood and began making life-altering decisions. The entry of Meghan Markle into Harry's life further accelerated the tension. From the moment their relationship became public, palace insiders noted a palpable shift. William, protective and wary of history repeating itself, became concerned with the media frenzy surrounding Meghan and the potential impact on the family. Harry, meanwhile, became increasingly assertive, defensive, and determined to chart a path of independence, rejecting the conventional expectations that William appeared to accept with stoic composure. One particularly telling moment occurred during a private family gathering in 2017. According to sources close to the palace, a discussion about media appearances and press strategy quickly escalated into a heated exchange. William emphasized caution and the importance of protocol, warning that missteps could have long-term consequences. Harry, in response, accused William of being inflexible, of prioritizing the institution over the individual, and of failing to recognize the pressures that he and Meghan faced on a daily basis. The conversation, though private, planted seeds of resentment that would bear fruit years later. This tension was compounded by the media's relentless scrutiny. Every move, statement, or public gesture was dissected, and the narratives often exaggerated differences between the brothers. Headlines frequently framed them as adversaries. Royal rift deepens. William versus Harry, brothers at odds over media strategy. Whether accurate or not, these stories seeped into the psyche of the family, reinforcing perceptions and, at times, distorting reality. Harry, already attuned to issues of public perception due to his mother's tragic history, grew increasingly distrustful, wary of being manipulated or misunderstood. Financial independence also became a point of contention. William, as heir, had access to substantial resources and a clear framework for managing royal finances. Harry and Meghan, after stepping back from official duties in 2020, pursued financial autonomy, signing lucrative deals with streaming platforms, book publishers, and private ventures. While this was framed by some as pragmatic, insiders suggest it exacerbated feelings of inequality and mistrust within the family. William, perceiving a potential undermining of royal authority and precedent, reportedly grew concerned that such moves could embolden others and destabilize traditional expectations. Perhaps the most poignant element of their rift lies in the emotional dynamic, the struggle between loyalty to family and loyalty to self. William's sense of duty demanded preservation of the monarchy, even at personal cost. Harry's sense of self demanded autonomy and protection of his immediate family, even at the cost of tradition. This philosophical divergence, while understandable on both sides, made reconciliation increasingly difficult. Emotional wounds accumulated, minor slights became magnified, and conversations once open became guarded or avoided entirely. Experts in royal dynamics point to communication breakdown as a key factor. Psychologists who study high-pressure family systems note that when trust erodes, misinterpretations flourish. In families where duty and public image are paramount, emotional expression is often constrained, explains Dr. Eleanor Jacobs, a family therapist who has worked with high-profile clients. When brothers like William and Harry are raised under intense scrutiny, resentment can fester, especially if one perceives favoritism or undue criticism. The public witnessed fragments of this tension through interviews, public statements, and memoirs. Harry's own disclosures about mental health struggles and feelings of isolation illuminated the private cost of royal life. William's public demeanor, in contrast, conveyed stability and control, yet insiders suggest it masked profound concern, frustration, and even sorrow over his brother's choices. The contrast in narrative, Harry's openness versus William's stoicism, created a perception gap that both fueled speculation and hardened positions. By 2022, these cumulative factors had created a scenario in which an extraordinary action became conceivable: the permanent removal of Harry and Meghan from succession and royal privileges. What may have started as disagreements over media appearances and personal autonomy had escalated into a matter of institutional survival, public perception, and personal principle. William's decision, while shocking to the world, was deeply rooted in years of unresolved tension, diverging life philosophies, and a desire to protect the monarchy from further disruption. This chapter of their story leaves us with a haunting question: how does a family navigate the intersection of love, loyalty, and duty when the stakes are global, the scrutiny relentless, and the consequences permanent? The answer, as William's announcement would later demonstrate, is fraught with pain, compromise, and irrevocable choices. As we move forward, we will explore Meghan's entry into the family, her role in intensifying scrutiny, and the pivotal moments that led William to act with such finality. The tale of two brothers, once inseparable, is a cautionary story of how personal differences, compounded by public pressure, can evolve into historical turning points. And as we peel back the layers, the emotional complexity of this rift will continue to unfold, revealing not just the reasons behind William's unprecedented decision, but also the human cost borne by every member of the family caught in its wake. The world first saw Meghan Markle in her element on television screens, portraying Rachel Zane in the hit series Suits, where she exuded confidence, charm, and a sense of independence that many admired. But few could have predicted that this American actress, born in Los Angeles, would one day enter the centuries-old, tradition-bound British monarchy and leave an indelible mark. Her arrival, both celebrated and scrutinized, became a defining moment in modern royal history. Meghan's initial introduction to Prince Harry was, by all accounts, casual yet consequential. A mutual friend reportedly arranged a blind date in 2016, though Harry later shared that he first noticed her on Instagram. Regardless of how their paths crossed, the connection was instant and intense. For Harry, Meghan represented a breath of fresh air, a partner who challenged norms, questioned tradition, and brought a perspective shaped by her own life experiences. Meghan, in turn, was drawn to Harry's warmth, humor, and his visible vulnerability stemming from his unique upbringing under intense media scrutiny. Their romance quickly became a subject of global fascination. The engagement announcement in 2017 ignited excitement and speculation alike, with fans lauding their union while tabloids and commentators scrutinized every detail of Meghan's life. The engagement ring, designed by Harry with diamonds from Princess Diana's collection, symbolized more than love. It was a bridge between the past and present, a merging of personal history with contemporary romance. Yet, beneath the surface, tensions began to simmer. Meghan's integration into the royal family was fraught with challenges from the outset. The monarchy, steeped in centuries of protocol and tradition, demanded adherence to rules that Meghan, accustomed to independence and self-expression, sometimes found constricting. Daily life was under constant surveillance, from security arrangements to media coverage, from wardrobe choices to the tone of public statements. Every action was analyzed, every gesture scrutinized, and the global public became an omnipresent observer. One of the earliest flashpoints occurred during Meghan's public appearances with Queen Elizabeth and other senior royals. Protocol dictated specific dress codes, formalities, and etiquette that Meghan, though respectful, interpreted with her own sense of style and agency. Some insiders described subtle clashes, Meghan advocating for modern approaches to engagements, challenging traditional media narratives, and insisting on autonomy in decision-making. While these actions reflected her confidence and assertiveness, they inadvertently fueled perceptions of tension within the palace. The media's role cannot be understated. Meghan, as an American woman with a successful career outside royalty, became a lightning rod for tabloid sensationalism. Stories ranged from commentary on her attire to speculation about her intentions within the royal family. Headlines frequently painted her as disruptive, ambitious, or even manipulative, framing her presence as a source of friction. Harry, protective as ever, publicly and privately defended Meghan. Yet this defense sometimes magnified the divide between the brothers, as William reportedly viewed the media strategy as confrontational and potentially harmful to the institution. Meghan's approach to charity and public engagements also marked a shift from traditional royal practices. She brought her own voice, emphasizing social issues such as gender equality, mental health, and racial justice. While these initiatives were widely praised internationally, some within the palace reportedly questioned the timing, messaging, and potential for controversy. The balance between personal advocacy and institutional responsibility became increasingly delicate, and Meghan's assertiveness in this domain often collided with the expectations of those committed to maintaining the monarchy's apolitical stance. Another critical moment occurred behind closed doors, according to palace insiders. Meghan allegedly struggled to adjust to the rigid structures governing royal life, including security measures, official schedules, and the constant scrutiny of staff and courtiers. Reports suggested that her candid feedback, while honest, was perceived by some as challenging the hierarchy and questioning decisions that had been established for generations. Harry, in turn, felt compelled to support her, creating a dynamic in which the brothers' priorities diverged. William remained focused on preservation of protocol, while Harry increasingly centered his loyalty on Meghan's well-being and autonomy. Public perception further intensified these internal dynamics. Social media amplified every anecdote, photograph, and news snippet, often presenting Meghan in a polarizing light. Fans and critics alike debated her motives, demeanor, and suitability for royal life. The constant narrative oscillated between admiration for her independence and condemnation for perceived arrogance, creating a feedback loop that heightened stress within the family. Harry, witnessing the toll on his wife, reportedly became more assertive, determined to carve out a life for his family that was separate from the constraints he had long accepted. The couple's decision to step back from official duties in 2020 marked a watershed moment. Dubbed Megxit by the media, this unprecedented move shocked the monarchy and the public alike. Meghan and Harry cited intense media scrutiny, threats to mental health, and a desire for independence as key factors. Financial autonomy through commercial deals, book projects, and media engagements followed, signaling a clear break from tradition. While this choice empowered them to live on their own terms, it also set the stage for long-term repercussions within the family. Critics argued that Meghan's influence had exacerbated existing tensions, framing her as a catalyst for Harry's growing estrangement from the monarchy. Supporters, however, contended that Meghan merely highlighted systemic issues, advocating for mental health, personal agency, and equality in a centuries-old institution resistant to change. Regardless of perspective, her presence undeniably shifted family dynamics, forcing both brothers to navigate a new reality in which personal loyalty, institutional duty, and public perception intersected in unprecedented ways. In retrospect, Meghan's royal arrival was not merely the story of a princess marrying a prince. It was the story of transformation, tension, and a collision of cultures. Her assertiveness, independence, and advocacy challenged the status quo, inspiring admiration while provoking friction. The consequences of this dynamic became increasingly visible as Harry and Meghan's decisions, from public statements to financial ventures, tested the monarchy's tolerance for divergence from tradition. The chapter closes with the recognition that Meghan's entrance into the royal family was both a personal journey and a catalyst for institutional upheaval. Her actions, decisions, and public persona played a crucial role in the unfolding narrative that would ultimately lead to Harry and Meghan's permanent banishment from succession and royal privileges. The seeds of conflict, planted during these early years, had grown into a tangible force, shaping decisions and relationships in ways that would redefine the monarchy for generations. As we move forward, the next chapter will explore the public backlash, media storm, and strategic moves by the monarchy that set the stage for the unprecedented announcement. Meghan's influence, both celebrated and criticized, remains central to understanding the broader story of division, loyalty, and the high-stakes decisions that shaped the royal family's future. The British media, notorious for its relentless coverage of the royal family, became an omnipresent force in Harry and Meghan's lives almost immediately. Every gesture, word, and expression was dissected, magnified, and often distorted to fit narratives that sold newspapers, attracted clicks, and fueled television ratings. For Meghan, an American accustomed to entertainment media, this level of scrutiny was unprecedented. For Harry, it was a harsh reminder of the pressures he had known since childhood, magnified by the weight of public expectation and historical precedent. From the very beginning, Meghan's every appearance was analyzed with intense detail. Fashion choices were critiqued, not just for taste, but for adherence to protocol. Interviews were combed through for signs of dissent or impropriety. Even casual photographs taken during royal outings were transformed into stories suggesting ulterior motives, conflicts, or tensions within the palace. Headlines labeled her as ambitious, controlling, manipulative, or, conversely, victimized. The sheer polarity of coverage created an environment in which nothing Meghan did could satisfy all observers, amplifying pressure on both her and Harry. The media's narrative often contrasted sharply with Meghan's own statements and intentions. For example, when she engaged in charitable work or advocated for social justice, certain outlets framed her as overstepping, suggesting that her activism was inappropriate for a royal. Other stories portrayed her as cold or disconnected, even when evidence suggested deep involvement in her chosen causes. This distortion created a dissonance between Meghan's reality and public perception, generating not only personal stress, but also conflict within the family as different members responded in varied ways. Social media played an equally critical role. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook transformed public opinion into an immediate and often brutal force. Fans celebrated Meghan's independence, while detractors weaponized every statement and appearance against her. Memes, viral posts, and commentary threads proliferated, reinforcing negative narratives and, at times, circulating false claims. The immediacy and intensity of this scrutiny left little room for private reflection or measured responses. For Harry, the media environment evoked memories of his mother's struggles with press intrusion, heightening protective instincts, and a growing sense of urgency to shield his family. Key events became flashpoints for media attention, magnifying conflict both within the palace and in the public sphere. One example was Meghan's interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021, which revealed personal struggles, allegations of racism, and criticisms of the royal institution. While the interview earned global attention and sympathy from many, it also provoked intense backlash from others, who accused Harry and Meghan of disloyalty, sensationalism, or manipulation. The result was a sharply divided public reaction that deepened existing tensions within the family. Palace insiders reportedly struggled to balance the demands of privacy with the need for public transparency. Statements were crafted cautiously, yet leaks and unauthorized reporting undermined official communication channels. The media often framed any attempt at explanation as an admission of fault, creating a cycle in which the royal family's responses were scrutinized for tone, content, and implications. The pressure of maintaining both dignity and credibility in this environment tested the resilience of Harry, Meghan, and the senior royals alike. Media narratives did more than shape public perception. They directly influenced relationships within the royal household. Reports suggested that William and Charles were frustrated by what they viewed as a public relations strategy that exacerbated scrutiny and controversy. Harry, increasingly defensive of Meghan, often clashed with William over the handling of press narratives and the degree of transparency expected from royals. These disagreements, initially private, occasionally spilled into public view through carefully timed statements or media leaks, heightening the sense of familial division and conflict. A particularly controversial aspect of media coverage involved claims about Meghan's relationship with staff and courtiers. Stories surfaced alleging tension between Meghan and long-serving palace employees, some depicting her as difficult, demanding, or dismissive of tradition. These narratives, whether entirely accurate or partially exaggerated, shaped perceptions of her character and fueled speculation about her influence on Harry's decisions. Supporters argued that such stories were amplified to reinforce stereotypes, while critics contended they reflected genuine concern about her integration into the royal system. The financial implications of media scrutiny were also significant. Commercial deals, media appearances, and book projects became entwined with public perception. Each venture was examined for motives, ethical considerations, and potential conflicts with royal duties. Harry and Meghan's pursuit of independent income sources, including lucrative Netflix and Spotify deals, was widely criticized by some commentators as opportunistic, while others framed it as a necessary step toward autonomy in the face of institutional limitations. This financial independence, coupled with intense media coverage, contributed to growing unease within the palace and public speculation about loyalty, duty, and propriety. Despite the adversarial nature of media coverage, Harry and Meghan remained highly strategic in their responses. Public statements, interviews, and social media posts were carefully curated to assert their perspective, challenge misinformation, and emphasize personal agency. Yet, even these measures often backfired, with narratives emphasizing confrontation rather than collaboration. The result was a cycle in which the couple's attempts to protect their image inadvertently fueled additional scrutiny, creating a feedback loop of tension, misinterpretation, and conflict. Underlying all of this was the shadow of historical precedent. Harry, acutely aware of the tragic consequences of invasive press coverage on his mother, Princess Diana, approached media relations with a combination of caution, protectiveness, and anxiety. Meghan, experiencing this environment for the first time, relied heavily on Harry's guidance, but also sought to assert her own voice. The intersection of personal history, family loyalty, and global media attention created a volatile environment in which every choice carried profound emotional and relational consequences. As the chapter closes, it becomes clear that the media storm surrounding Harry and Meghan was not a mere backdrop, but a central driver of familial and institutional tension. Public perception, amplified by relentless reporting and social media, shaped internal decisions, influenced alliances, and contributed directly to the eventual announcement that would banish the couple from succession and royal privileges. The storm highlighted the fragility of public image, the power of narrative, and the immense pressure faced by those living in the royal spotlight. In the next chapter, we will delve into the behind-the-scenes dynamics between Harry, William, and Charles, exploring the personal conflicts, emotional strains, and strategic calculations that culminated in the unprecedented decision to permanently remove Harry and Meghan from the line of succession. The tension between Harry, William, and Charles had been simmering for years, but the series of public and private conflicts surrounding Harry and Meghan accelerated what many palace insiders feared was an inevitable rift. Every action, every decision, and every statement seemed to widen the chasm between the brothers and their father, turning minor disagreements into defining moments of royal history. Harry's relationship with William had always been complex. As children, they shared laughter, adventures, and the weight of public expectation. Yet beneath the surface lay differences in temperament, priorities, and perspectives on duty. William, raised to assume the crown and its responsibilities, often embraced tradition, protocol, and the careful cultivation of public image. Harry, in contrast, felt the sting of being a spare, acutely aware of the limitations imposed upon him by birth order, and often sought avenues to assert individuality and agency. Meghan's entrance into Harry's life intensified these dynamics, introducing new perspectives, expectations, and, according to some sources, a sense of urgency for Harry to protect his family at all costs. Charles, as king-in-waiting and then sovereign, faced his own pressures. The delicate balance between public service, family loyalty, and historical precedent required constant negotiation. Reports suggest that Charles recognized Harry's desire for independence and initially sought compromise, granting the couple space while maintaining ties to the institution. Yet, repeated public disclosures, contentious interviews, and media conflicts strained this approach. The king reportedly struggled with the dual imperative of safeguarding the monarchy's integrity while addressing the emotional needs of his younger son, creating a fraught environment in which miscommunication and misperception were inevitable. Private meetings between Harry, William, and Charles reportedly became arenas of high emotion, strategic negotiation, and, at times, confrontation. William, increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as breaches of trust and protocol, often argued for a stricter approach, emphasizing duty over personal sentiment. Harry, motivated by a protective instinct toward Meghan and a desire to chart an independent path, resisted these pressures, insisting that personal well-being could not be sacrificed in the name of tradition. Charles, caught in the middle, attempted mediation but found himself navigating a complex web of historical expectation, familial loyalty, and public scrutiny. One significant point of contention was Harry and Meghan's public communications. Interviews, social media posts, and commercial endeavors were seen by William and Charles as undermining the monarchy's image and authority. Critics within the palace argued that these actions shifted public focus from the institution's work to the personal grievances of its members, potentially eroding trust and support. Harry and Meghan, however, framed these communications as necessary for transparency, mental health advocacy, and personal security, creating a stark divergence in perception that fueled internal conflict. The birth of Archie and Lilibet added layers of emotional complexity. While the joy of new life could have served as a bridge, reports suggested intensified disagreements over protocol, public exposure, and media strategy. Decisions about christenings, titles, and public appearances became flashpoints, highlighting differences in vision for the family's future. William and Charles reportedly favored traditional, controlled ceremonies that reinforced royal continuity, while Harry and Meghan sought to balance tradition with personal values and privacy, reflecting a broader philosophical divide about what it meant to be a modern royal family. Financial independence further complicated the rift. Harry and Meghan's pursuit of commercial ventures, including high-profile media deals and speaking engagements, was framed by some royal observers as a challenge to institutional norms. The couple argued these efforts were necessary to maintain autonomy and security outside the constraints of royal allowances. Within the palace, however, concerns grew about perception, ethics, and precedent. The discussion of finances became more than a practical matter. It symbolized deeper disagreements about loyalty, duty, and the evolving definition of royal responsibility. Sources indicate that trust, or the lack thereof, was central to the widening divide. Leaks, public statements, and strategic media appearances eroded confidence between the siblings and between father and son. William reportedly felt blindsided by certain revelations, believing that private family matters were being disclosed for public consumption. Harry, on the other hand, often cited a pattern of institutional failure to support personal well-being, framing transparency as a necessary corrective measure. These divergent interpretations of actions and intentions created a cycle in which each side perceived betrayal, further entrenching animosity and complicating reconciliation. Emotional undercurrents ran deep in these conflicts. Reports suggest that Harry experienced feelings of marginalization, resentment, and isolation, intensified by the memory of his mother's tragic death and the unrelenting scrutiny that had defined his upbringing. Meghan's presence offered both support and challenge. She provided a partner in navigating these pressures, but also introduced perspectives and expectations that sometimes clashed with palace norms. William, feeling the weight of future responsibilities and public expectation, reportedly experienced frustration, anger, and a sense of inevitability regarding Harry's choices, while Charles faced guilt, disappointment, and the complex challenge of reconciling institutional duty with paternal concern. Behind the headlines, advisors and courtiers worked tirelessly to mediate, strategize, and manage the fallout. Confidential briefings, internal memos, and crisis management plans became routine as palace officials sought to prevent further erosion of public confidence. Yet, as each meeting ended, the same questions lingered. Could personal relationships survive amid such pressures? Could the monarchy adapt to accommodate new interpretations of independence and duty? And ultimately, could compromise reconcile two sons with diverging visions for their lives and roles within the institution? As tensions escalated, it became clear that the rift was no longer just a private family matter. Public perception, media narratives, and political implications created a situation in which the consequences of inaction were profound. Advisors reportedly warned that without a decisive resolution, the monarchy risked sustained instability, public criticism, and a fracturing of trust that could reverberate for generations. The stage was set for a monumental decision that would alter the trajectory of the family and redefine the boundaries of royal privilege, succession, and loyalty. By the close of this chapter, it becomes evident that the widening gap between Harry, William, and Charles was not simply a matter of personal disagreement. It was a complex interplay of history, expectation, media influence, personal trauma, and strategic calculation. Every interaction, every disagreement, and every public revelation contributed to an environment in which reconciliation seemed increasingly difficult, setting the stage for the unprecedented announcement that would ultimately banish Harry, Meghan, and their children from the line of succession. In the next chapter, we will explore the immediate reactions within the palace and public sphere, capturing the shock, debate, and emotional fallout that followed the first whispers of Harry and Meghan's permanent removal. Meghan Markle walks out on Jimmy Kimmel after brutal exchange. "You went too far." The world had been waiting for clarity, speculation running rampant across newspapers, social media, and news broadcasts. The tension within the royal family was no longer a private matter confined to palace walls. It had spilled into the public sphere, where every rumor, every leak, and every subtle gesture was dissected and analyzed by millions. It was in this charged atmosphere that Prince William finally decided to make the announcement that would shock the monarchy and the world alike. On a crisp morning at Kensington Palace, the cameras were set, the media briefed, and the press corps lined up outside the gates, buzzing with anticipation. Observers noted the unusual formality of the occasion, a clear signal that something significant was about to be revealed. William, poised yet visibly tense, stepped forward to address the gathered audience. Every movement, every measured breath, conveyed the gravity of the moment. In his hand, a carefully prepared statement awaited, but the weight of history hung over every word. William's address began with a measured acknowledgement of the challenges facing the modern monarchy. He spoke of duty, tradition, and the responsibility of ensuring the stability and integrity of the institution. His tone was solemn, reflecting the gravity of the decision that was about to be announced. Yet, even in his composed delivery, there was an undercurrent of emotion, a mixture of regret, frustration, and determination that could not be entirely masked. The announcement that followed sent shockwaves through the gathered press. Harry and Meghan, along with their children, were to be permanently removed from the line of succession and stripped of their royal privileges. The statement made clear that this decision was irrevocable, citing repeated actions and public disclosures that had undermined the monarchy and strained familial trust. Advisors within the palace later confirmed that the announcement had been meticulously planned to minimize confusion while maximizing clarity, but the impact was immediate and profound. Reactions were swift and intense. Within the palace, courtiers and aides scrambled to manage the aftermath, preparing official communications, responding to inquiries, and coordinating security measures. The decision touched not only the immediate family but also extended relatives, as the implications for protocol, titles, and inheritance rippled outward. Public relations teams worked tirelessly to craft messaging that balanced transparency with decorum, but the unprecedented nature of the announcement ensured that speculation and debate would dominate headlines for days, weeks, and months to come. Media coverage captured a spectrum of responses. Analysts debated the potential legal ramifications, historians weighed the historical significance, and commentators speculated on the long-term impact on public perception. Social media erupted, with supporters of the decision praising William's firmness and critics questioning the fairness and necessity of such a drastic measure. Hashtags, opinion threads, and viral videos proliferated, turning a single royal announcement into a global conversation about duty, loyalty, and family dynamics.